Hey, welcome to the conversation that's as diverse as the dogs that we adore. This is Gun Dogs and Guard Dogs, ultimate podcast dedicated to talking sense about dogs with Les Graham and Ross McCarthy. They work with all breeds of dog, but one specialises in gun dogs and the other prefers guard dogs. No flashy trends or social media hype here, just tried and true knowledge that stands the test of time. They bring you valuable insights and honest conversations about the social predator you share your home with. So here we go. About 45 minutes of gun dogs, guard dogs, good dogs, some maybe not so good dogs, and a dash of gossip.
Okay, good morning. Here we are again, Les.
Indeed we are. How are you, Mr. McCarthy?
I'm fine, thank you. We are joined today by, I was going to say a special guest, very special guest, Colin Tennant from the Canine Feline Behaviour Association, who's the chairman, who has a very interesting and long career in the world of dog behaviour and training. And I thought it'd be really fascinating to have a little chat about how the industry's changed and things over that period of time. But before we delve into that, Colin, can you give us a little bit about your history, your canine career journey, why dogs, where it started?
Yes, I started in dog training at the age of 12, like a lot of people, going to clubs. I then went to a professional kennels, a training centre in Manchester at the age of 16, where I spent 4 years accumulating knowledge on breeding, showing, dog training, trials work. And I had the good fortune of working with quite a large number of dog handlers from the Greater Manchester Police. And that's where I learned my trials work, which was at that time I was doing obedience. And I was introduced to trials work, especially police trials work. And I learned over that 4 years the skills of tracking, scent discrimination, criminal work, distance control, and all the other aspects of advanced police dog training. And then eventually, when I got to the age of 20, I joined the Cheshire Constabulary and continued my career there, eventually getting into the dog section.
As a very young police dog handler, weren't you, at the time?
I was, I think, the youngest police dog handler in Britain and the first unmarried one,
Wow.
which must have been an omen because I'm still unmarried.
So how long were you in the force before you moved across the dog section?
Mandatory, you have to be in 2 years to what they call specialise. So some officers at 2 years will go into the CIDT or the traffic or the horse section, depending on the police force. But to get on the dog section then, I'm not sure it's changed that much now. It was always dead men's shoes. Now it'll be dead men's and women's shoes. The average wait to get on the dog section when I joined the police was about 10 years.
Wow.
And that was most of the police dog handlers I was training with were 35-ish.
Good grief.
So
And they'd been waiting all that time to get into the
yes.
dog section.
Well, that was for two reasons. One, the dog section is a very small part of the police. Cheshire at that time had about 1,800 police officers and only 25 to 30 were dog handlers.
Right.
So, and once people got on the dog section, they never left unless they went out in a box.
Now they
So
can't
to get
get out.
no, things have changed now. And so I was in the right place at the right time. Plus, I'd been badgering the dog inspector. I remember his name, even Mr. Starkey, who didn't know much about dogs and had never owned one, but that's the way the police were. And he saw that I was keen. I explained my previous experience, and the police officer who was in my division, which again, there's 5 divisions, so a 1 in 5 chance, he left just as I reached 2 years. And so I was offered the position. And that advanced my career, and I learned all the practical sides of police work. But the main reason I joined the police was to be on the dog section.
Mm.
And actually, a few days ago, I was speaking to a police officer, a retired police officer from Cheshire, who spent 35 years in the police. And his ambition was to join the horse section because he loves horses. And he
Interesting.
never, one, Cheshire didn't have horses, and he couldn't get on the horse section in the adjoining police forces. So horses were his hobby when he wasn't a police officer. And he's only just stopped riding horses now, and he's 80.
Craigie. When I was a kid, I wanted to join the mounted section in Northumberland Police. Um, but I couldn't. I damaged my pelvis, so it was completely. I couldn't ride at the time. And then my life changed. But I know at the time, like a lot of the police going into the mountain division, some of them hadn't really ridden and had to learn everything from scratch rather than relearn it. Is that the same in the dog section, Colin, or was it the same in the dog section? So police were moving through that never really had a dog or handled a dog.
Oh, indeed, it was. You know, at 22, being the age difference between me and the other dog handlers that would all come onto the training course, I think there was about 12 of us, as I recall. None of them had ever trained a dog.
Right.
Most of them, this was the first time they were interacting with dogs on a training scale.
Mhm.
So it was a bit awkward at times because when I was sat in the evenings when we were discussing the day's training as the course progressed for 2 months, I think it was 10 or 12 weeks. And of course, I'd obtained all this knowledge from the kennels. And when I did my degree, which was the same degree that you did, MA degree, I was writing down my history for the university in dog. And it was only when I wrote my reflective essays
Mhm.
that I actually realized what I'd achieved from the age of 16 to 20. I'd never given it a thought for 20 years. I'd never given it a thought. But when I had to write it all down, I understood the psychology of what the university meant, how you obtained your knowledge, how you learn your skills. And so I wrote to the owner of the kennels, Peggy Litton, who's been dead now about 3 or 4 years. So she lived into her late 90s. And I asked her how many dogs I trained. I roughly had an idea, but I wanted it confirmed in writing with a signature. And I trained roughly six to 700 dogs in that 4 years, mainly for the public on our premises.
Mhm.
And I'd also trained, I think, about a dozen dogs in trials, border collies, Dobermans, Rottweilers, even tried an Irish Wolfhound. That wasn't so successful. And I was doing this 7 days a week virtually for 4 years and 10-hour days. So the training side I'd received from that and all the tracking with the police officers, I was their kind of chief track layer
Mhm.
because they didn't have a lot of facilities. And we had acreages and we could lay tracks for them, or I could lay tracks at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then the dog handlers would arrive in their vans around about 10 or 12, and then they would start tracking. And I had to keep a mindset of what I'd done. And so I was a great observer. I was very gregarious. So I had no inhibitions about asking them questions. And then I started on to the criminal work. Now, if you bear in mind with the health and safety we have today,
Mm.
where, children have to be safe and they have to have yellow jackets before they're allowed to go in the library to get a book in case they get lost. Um, when the police officers just turned to me and stuck a padded arm and said, run down the field, I had no fear whatsoever because at that age, you're rather stupid. And you just think, oh, this will all work out. They know what they're doing. And so quickly, I got hit by a huge German Shepherd that bowled me over onto the floor. And the sympathy you got those in those days, in the late 70s, was, well, get up,
Uh-huh.
stop whinging, and next time don't fall over. and and from there, I become quite skilled playing the criminal for all the, and I would do 4 or 5 police dogs in the morning. But they'd all be getting the dogs out because they didn't know me. That was good training for them.
Mhm.
Of course, now the police would probably end up in prison if they did that with somebody of 16. And I saw 2 or 3 police officers get injured.
Mm.
One giant of a police officer, he must have been about 6'4". He ran for a dog after me. And when the dog hit him, it came off the arm and it tore a diagonal wound across his chest. And I think he needed about 15 stitches in the hospital. And I saw all the blood and all the guts and all the emotion. And within 15 minutes, I had another padded arm on running for another police dog down the field. And it never occurred to me that that could happen to me. But that's what you like when you're young.
Where
You
did
kind
that
of,
where did
No
that
sense, no feeling.
passion come from? Like the initial passion to want to be there all that time, to work 7 days a week at that age and be around the dogs. Was it about the dogs to start with, or it was just a job that you fell into, or what?
well, I came from a city, Liverpool, and although I lived in the south of the city, which had lots of parks and greenery, I've always loved the countryside. And I've always loved dogs. I mean, I trained my first dog from a book when I was 12, I think, or 11 or 12. And I actually trained it up to a reasonable obedience standard just from a book, not from any examples. And so the passion for it wasn't just dogs. The passion I had was for all animals. And I've maintained that through all my life. I've traveled, as you know, Ross, in different countries, especially in Africa, filming animals. And so my passion for animals is still the same. I mean, this morning, when I was in the garden, I was looking in the field and I could see a buzzard on some prey at the bottom. And it fascinated me this morning, this buzzard on some prey at the bottom of the field, as it did when I was 12. That has not, I've not lost that. That's still there. And of course, you can't own wildlife, but you can own a dog.
Mm.
So therefore, my mum got me my first dog, which was a crossbreed called Rocky. She was a cross Samoyed sheepdog. I say I was about 11 or 12 at that time. And again, I didn't know what a Samoyed was, and I didn't know, well, I knew roughly what a sheepdog was. I didn't realize that wasn't a great cross for dog training. I mean, Samoyeds probably lower down on the ranking scale of trainability. But my attitude was it was a dog, it had 4 legs. The book said it could do this, and I followed the book and I trained her up to a very high level. And I joined the club in Liverpool called Heighton and Roby Dog Training Club. And I waltzed around with this dog doing all these things, with all these, at the time, again, what seemed to me like adults people, although in those days, somebody of 20 was old.
Mm.
When you're 50, when you're 12, 13, or 14, somebody of 20 is old.
Mm-hmm.
Now I don't quite see it that way.
No, none of us do. And when when did you make the decision to leave the police, and what was that?
And well, I I was watching all the police officers, and I was chatting to a lot of the older police officers, and I generally have always had a low threshold of boredom. And when you've been to 50 domestic disputes, granted they're all different, but also they're all the same.
Mm.
There's a row going on. You go in, you try to solve it, which is always amusing when you're 20 and the people who are fighting with each other, the man and woman, are like 30 or 40. And you come there and they look at you as if, well, what do you know? You're not even married.
Mm.
But the law's the law, and you try to learn from the other police officers what to do. But I thought, do I really want to do another 500 of these or 1,000 in the next 30 odd years? And that's how I viewed the repetition of it. And I'd got onto the dog section, so that stimulated me to take a greater interest. But I thought, this is also repetitive. I've got the dog, but it's still repetitive. And my imagination, I've always had a vivid imagination. My imagination, I thought I would like to travel, maybe set up my own kennels, which eventually I did. And the restrictions of the police would stop me doing that, because in those days you couldn't have a second occupation. Apparently you can now. And I also got offered an amazing job through people who knew the police. I didn't know. And so I was offered a job abroad in the Middle East and Saudi Arabia as a private, if you wish, security stroke police officer attached to the Saudi mode of police in the desert on a missile base. And the attraction of that was wages in those days were very, very low. A lot of police officers could get support off the state because the wages were so low, which
Wow.
was disgraceful.
Mm.
And best just say, I was offered a job, and my recruitment officer said, would you like to go up to Glasgow, of all places? I'd never been to Scotland. And I did a training course and I went to Saudi Arabia and worked there on 10 times my annual salary.
Good grief.
With no tax, with no costs, no food, nothing. And that was quite a shock to the system, going into a country like that, which is basically medieval with oil. And I was offered to stay. I'd earned enough money, I could come back and buy a property, which I did, with some land, which I did in Hertfordshire, yes. And I started training dogs on my own premises. And I had lived in London for about 4 months in a boarding house. Say no more about that. Ross knows the story of the boarding house. It wasn't quite a boarding house.
Oh, okay.
And well, put it this way, there was me, one other male, and 20 women.
Okay, there's a story for that later.
That's not a story we want to tell now. And I thought, with my training skills, I would do some training in the West End in central London, because I'd looked in what we had then as the phone book, and there didn't seem to be any trainers. So I knocked on a few vets in the West End. And I met one vet who was complaining to me about another vet that had just moved in round the corner. So this is off Marylebone Road, Seymour Place round there. And I was still getting to know London and the West End, and I walked everywhere. And I walked into this vet, and many people will know who this vet is when I mention his name. He was a young Canadian vet, married to quite a famous female film star, and his name was Bruce Fogel, Dr. Fogel. And we chatted. I gave him my card and said what I did, and he was a very quiet, unassuming man, not like me. And I got a phone call. And from that phone call, I started training dogs in the West End, traveling in each day from Hertfordshire. And my business burgeoned for the next 30 years. And I was training people who were generally, let's say, well off. And Bruce sent me some of the best clients you could desire in Britain. And there was no other place in Britain where you could do this then. I just happened to land again in the right place at the right time and knock on the right vet's door. And in a couple of days' time, I'll be seeing Bruce in person in North London at an event, which I won't go into now, but that'll be the first time I've spoken to him in person, probably for about 15 years. And as I understand it, he's still he must be in his 80s. He's still a veterinary surgeon working part-time.
Yeah.
So,
But
yeah,
they all are, all the old vets, they just keep working, don't they?
Yeah,
yeah,
the good
they
ones.
do.
Yeah. When did
Uh,
you when did you move, Colin? So your kind of business model then was training, you going out working with the dogs, training those, then imparting those skills onto the owners, wasn't it? I believe.
well, I first came in every day, say from 10 till 4, trying to avoid the traffic because it was a 25-mile journey, and everybody knows how bad London is for driving. Well, at that time, it was really bad. Now, I think you can't drive, it's impossible. And I got to know a lot of my clients. And of course, I'd never met this style of client before. I mean, I trained people in Cheshire and I trained people in Manchester, but I've never come across um, first of all, in my entire career training dogs for the public in London and practicing canine behavior, um, about 90% of my clients were foreign, which wouldn't happen in most parts of Britain. Although, having said that, it might now. Um, but so that was unusual. And although I'd been to the Middle East and I'd been working with lots of foreigners, Turks, Thais, Europeans, and so on, training people, lots of Americans, Saudis, Kuwaitis, Jordanians, Lebanese. I had a rather good entourage of Iranians who were absolutely one of my favorite foreign groups of people to train. They were all highly educated, very nice, love their dogs. And I still keep in touch with some of them today. So that was unusual. And if you think about it, to live in the central London in Belgravia, Chelsea, Knightsbridge, um, and Hampstead, all these areas, very wealthy areas. So there's a type of person that can afford to live in them. Um, and all the ones I dealt with, I mean, actual English people I dealt with was probably less than one in 10.
Mm.
1 in 10.
Mm.
In actual fact, I had a period of training some people in Camden in social housing who were nearly all English, and they were poor. They didn't have much money, and I adjusted my charges for them because they couldn't afford my normal prices. And that was the nearest I got to training English people, and that went on for several decades. I mean, if you take um, film people and people in the media, which I had lots and lots of them. Some of them would have private estates. I remember some quite well-known film directors, and they all had estates around London, in Wiltshire, in Sussex, and so on. So I would go down to their estates and train them. That was the nearest I got for training English people. In central London, they were nearly all of foreign origin. And that taught me a great deal about attitudes of different cultures, different races towards dogs. Naturally, because I was training dogs, all the people I was training, who were all nearly foreign, they obviously love dogs because otherwise I wouldn't have been there.
Mm.
And although there's lots of talk at the moment about banning dogs in certain parts, not just because of children, because of the religion and Islam mainly, I trained many Arabs who obviously were Muslims, and they had no problem with dogs. But again, you're talking of really what I would call the educated classes. I remember training a prince connected to the then Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, and he had German Shepherds, and he lived in St. John's Wood, and I used to meet him and two other princesses. Seemed to be a lot of them, and I trained him. He was a bad timekeeper. Um, I corrected that quickly. I just played him at his own game. And when he was late, I was late. And eventually he got the message. But he was nice, and we trained dogs. He's a Muslim. And but I also learned, because I was training in central London, I was training the Shah of Iran's daughter, who'd escaped from the Iranian Revolution. And she was living in what we now know Marble Arch, around there. And that was a big, what we call an Arab quarter then. There were lots of Lebanese there, lots of Lebanese restaurants. And so when I was walking round Marble Arch, the north end of Hyde Park, with clients and their dogs, train them in the street, heel work, and stays and comes and sits and downs, then recall in the park. Most of them were fine, but occasionally I would see some Arabs, generally from the oil states, walking up to me, a crowd of them, and I had a German Shepherd, and they would just literally part like the Red Sea. You could see they were frightened of the dog. They used part just open up, which was nice in a way because the pavements around there are crowded, so I had a free range to walk. But that would normally be, I found out later, because eventually I got to train a lot of Arabs. And that was normally new Arabs that had just come to Britain on holiday for the first time, and they weren't used to seeing dogs, so many dogs walking on the streets from where they came from. But I became very fond of the Lebanese, who kind of a mixed European Arab culture. And I befriended a Lebanese man and his wife, who was, unbeknown to me, he was an extremely rich man. And he loved German Shepherds. And he came up to my place in Applewood in Hertfordshire. And we become quite good friends. And he was friends with me for the next 25 years. And then he invited me out to Lebanon on a number of occasions, and I would go out to Lebanon, train his dogs in his retreat up in the mountains, and he would give me a car and a driver. And being a student of history, which is outside dogs, is my favorite occupation, history, ancient and modern, he would take me all to the Roman temples in Baalbek. And so I mixed dog training and behavior with sightseeing of ancient historic sites from the Roman period.
Well, nothing's changed, does it? We all get those opportunities now. When you were doing that, Colin, when you were training dogs and whatever, how many other dog trainers were there around, and how many animal behaviourists or canine behaviourists were you in competition with?
Well, I've read some of the notes that somebody sent me on the veterinary college's view on who's doing what and why and how they would like to take control of it, which is, as always, a power grab. And so when I started in the West End, it would be about 1983. And there was one dog trainer that I was aware of on the south side of the Thames. People outside London may not realise this, but that time anyway, people who lived in the south of the Thames stayed on the south, and people in the north stayed on the north. So I never went on the south side of the Thames because you have to cross those bridges and the traffic's bad enough. And so he was on the south side of the Thames. I believe he was an ex-policeman, so I presume he was on the dog section. I never met him, didn't see him, and there were no other trainers that I was aware of. There were no other trainers. But the gold standard for me, an opportunity, was my relationship with Bruce Vogel, the vet. Because he had lots of clients who had lots of problems with their dogs, especially the little dogs, snapping and snarling and peeing in the house. I never could understand that when I went into these beautiful houses, mansions, they had a dog or puppy and they were trying to house train it, and they always had white carpets. And I could never understand why you'd have, I come from Liverpool, you wouldn't have a white carpet with kids, let alone with a dog. And I did ask a few of them, I said, why do you have white carpets? And they said, oh, well, it looks nice. And, well, it doesn't look nice now. The dogs are coming off London Street with all muck on the feet. So yes, So there was one dog trainer. I'm not saying there wasn't others. I was not aware of others. Competition-wise, I didn't have any. And my name suddenly grew, and then I ended up with the 4 or 5 main vets in the centre of London, the West End, who joined up forces, and they had another veterinary surgery down Elizabeth Street, down in Belgravia, which was their 24-hour, 7-day-a-week vet, which they all contributed to. I think it's still going now.
Yeah.
And that meant that those 4 vets didn't have to work weekends or late at night. So Simon, the vet who ran Elizabeth Street then, he would send me dogs from Belgravia. And so I got all the Belgravia dogs. Now, with regards to behavior, this is a little novel tale, which I may have told Ross before. After about a year or so, I was still striding to opening up a kennels, or buying some land, selling my house I'd just bought for a larger piece of land, and moreover, not so much a larger piece of land, but isolated so there was no barking issues with neighbours, which is what most people who want dogs, whether it's breeding, training, or behaviour, if you've got neighbours, you'll end up in legal problems always with dogs barking. So the main thing for me was having a place where there was at least a mile or two between me and the nearest houses. And I was in the process of doing that, which took until 1987, I think, 87. And so in the following 3 or 4 years, I was living in Chipperfield in Hertfordshire. I had maybe 10 kennels, but they weren't specifically for dog training. They were for my breeding. I was breeding German Shepherds then. And so I started to realize then, and I'm not saying I was the first to realize it, because John Fisher was working in Surrey then at his place, as a dog trainer of sorts. And I met him eventually. He was a very, very nice man, a very simple man and not complicated. And he had been a parks security of some type with a dog in London. That was his background. So I met him eventually, but the word behavior, as we know now, behaviorist, hadn't really been coined. I think even the word animal behaviorist, as a degree, was still in its infancy. Most of them were biologists or zoologists. There wasn't, I think the courses were just being developed in Britain anyway. And so I was describing dog behavior in my reports to my clients, and I was saying this behavioral issue, that behavioral issue. And I realized that although dog training and dog behavior are not really separate occupations as behaviors would have you think now, there is specifically an area of knowledge when you're trying to, I looked upon it like a police detection, like a detective. A dog has a problem, and your job is to discover how the problem occurred and then what is the solution. Just like detecting a crime. So I used my police knowledge to set this down, and then I started writing reports to the best of my knowledge. Again, I can't say I was the first. I started writing reports for clients, not huge ones, and setting out examples, because I also realized that when dog trainers are out doing basic dog training or explaining how to avoid a certain behavior situation, they talk thousands of words to the client. And by some miracle, the client's expected to remember all this verbiage. And they can't, because they're often a little bit tense if they've got, say, an aggressive dog, and they can't remember everything. So I started to write down, I didn't do leaflets, I just wrote down a letter, if you wish, and they expanded over time to what we now, what I eventually developed with the psychology profiles, in the 80s behavior, which at that time, again, I wasn't aware that anybody did that in Britain. I think I was the first to set down comprehensive canine profiles. In other words, I profiled the dog, the family, its circumstances, its environment, its history. So the antecedents, which is an old police word I used at the time, the antecedents of the dog, in the history of the dog. So was in a house with two people, one person in a flat in London, often 5 stories up. Did he have access to gardens, parks, and so on? And so I collected and eventually collated all this information. And I still have thousands of these documents from the 80s and 90s to the 2000s upstairs in my loft of all the people I trained then, which is quite a comprehensive document list. And the idea of that was that I noticed that when people saw me for a dog, they say, oh, my dog's peeing in the house. So I'd go down to Mayfair or somewhere, find this dog on the normal white carpet in a mansion, and I'd set about solving the dog urinating, defecating in the house. And then they would say to me, as we got success, they would say to me, oh, and he nips people when they come in. And I thought, well, I didn't come to see you for that. And then they started throwing in other what we now would call specific behaviors. So I ended up diverting from the purpose I was there to solve house training for a dog or a puppy. And now I was being distracted by other behaviors. And because you form personal relationships with people, what I noticed was that they had no problem in telling me, oh, and I love the saying that you say, and he's just got this little problem, like he's been chewing the slippers. And of course, it wasn't a little problem. The dog had been chewing, say, for 6 months, and it chewed dozens and dozens of items, furniture, carpets. So as you can see, that's not a little problem. So I was being spread thin on the original problem. So that's when I set down the profiles and decided to itemize problems. So I wrote down all the possible problems. I don't know how many's on the list now, Ross, on that
Quite a
profile
lot.
for. Yeah,
Over
it'd be 20 or 30.
Yeah.
And so I got them to fill this form in when I came to the house. And they spent 20, 25 minutes filling this form in. And then I said to them in writing, you brought me here for this problem. The other problems you've mentioned are ancillary. They're not the reason you brought me here or paying me. Because as you can understand, they may tick 10 problems. I can't deal with 10 problems in a 2.5 consultation, especially if the main one's aggression. I just can't. So that also helped the owners psychologically, as they're writing it down, realize the amount of issues they've got with the dog. So it gives them time to reflect. So the expectation of me wasn't I came down, waved a wand, and 10 problems disappeared. It made them realize, and some of the problems would be related to the aggression. So, for example, you say the dog growled over food sometimes, and but I'd been brought in because the dog was growling at dogs in the street. And now we got to growling in the house over food. So there is some connection with the dog's behavior. So I formulated the canine behavior profiles, which are how long we've been using them since, well, I've been using them since the late mid-80s. And I refined them over time. And they're now standard use for a lot of the canine and feline behaviorists. And they help you have an actual body of information that the owners supplied to you. Because remember, this happened on a number of occasions. I would solve the problem. And a year later, I get a call off the owner and she said, oh, Colin, I've got problems with the dog still. So you listen to the word still. That would tell me what we dealt with before. But it wasn't what we dealt with before. Not at all. It was a completely different behavior. But she said still. So I'd always, in my police fashion, which is not always received well or clinical, I would say, so are you telling me that the problem I came to see you with originally, let's say it was barking at visitors or what have you, that's fine. And then they go, well, yes. I said, well, is it or isn't it? And they go, well, yes. But since then, he's now started doing another behavior they don't like. So it's not for the original reason. You both experienced this, or all behaviorists experience this. And then I was able to say, well, this is a separate consultation and a separate behavior, and we have to start at the beginning again and see what we can do to assist you. And I always was passionate. I always gave my best, as I did with dog training. You know, people said to me, you can't train Basset Hounds or Salukis or Sight Hounds or this breed or that breed. My view was in London, in Hyde Park, with hundreds of dogs running around me, not in a church hall where everybody's got the dog on a lead, but in Hyde Park where you've got dogs running up to you, past you, on your dog, and you're trying to train, sit and heel. Well, there is no place in London to do this privately. I had to do it in the places where people walk their dog. And so the dog training I did in the real environment, which without doubt, the thing I learned from that overall was that if you can train a dog in a public park with all those multiple distractions of children, noises, sound, other dogs, you can train a dog anywhere. And that's very different to training a dog in a field on your own with a client. The two are not comparable. And so I learned a lot how to train dogs in the real world, which is what I believe is missing now. We have endless people on the internet theorizing, oh, I can train a dog to sit in 5 moves or with this miraculous method. Yes, can you do it in Hyde Park with the dog sat next to you with 10 dogs running past you at 10 miles or 20 miles an hour? Can you do it there? And of course, in most cases, they can't, because you have to practice in that environment. But going back to the behavior, once I realized some people needed more information specifically on behavior, I then termed dog training as what I call mechanical, perhaps not the best word, but mechanical in the sense as a set of commands, actions, associations, and you're teaching a dog step by step to sit, to come, to lay down, to heel, and so on. Whereas behavior, although there's psychology in dog training, in behavior, it's more about the psychology of the environment, how the dog reacts in that environment, and what you're trying to achieve or stop or teach the dog. And then I started to separate them. However, having said that, I then coined the term dog behaviorist. The dog behavior practitioner was the first one I used, and that was on my letterheading for decades. And I hadn't seen that term used before. And then the term dog behaviorist was being used by a number of people. And I was quite happy to interchange between dog behaviorist, and dog behavior practitioner.
How did that come about? Because you were just saying, working in London and stuff, you didn't have any competition, and now taking that forward to 2026, there's a dog trainer and a behaviourist on every street corner. So where did you see that kind of transition or notice? Where did it come from? Because we know, like back in, even like 20 years ago, we didn't have any courses really. So when did that kind of transit? When did all these people pop up, and how did that industry change?
Probably the late 80s, early 90s. A friend of mine, who Dr. Roger Mugford, who's an animal behaviourist.
Everyone knows Roger.
Right. So I got to know Roger. He was my first competition, and I was living in Belgravia in a lovely house that a friend of mine let me use as my training place just behind Buckingham Palace. So I had this lovely place. I did live there for about 6 months, but then I bought a house in Hertfordshire. And I had this lady bring me a German Shepherd, which is my breed. And, I've trained over my life hundreds and hundreds of German Shepherds. And it was really aggressive. And she was stood outside my house in Belgravia. So I thought I'd meet her outside before I brought her into the office. And she was about 30, and this was a long-coated German Shepherd. And I said to her, so you tell me he's aggressive, because we'd obviously chatted on the phone. And she said, yes. And then suddenly this dog just leapt at me, full at my face with its fangs wide open. Fortunately, I'd been well trained by the Manchester police when I was very young. So to most people in dogs, that would be quite a shock or a trauma. To me, it was just a dog trying to bite me. So I dealt with that by parrying it, and I told her to stand still, which she couldn't because the dog was dragging up towards me. So I can't remember what I had in my hand. I must have had folder or something, and I used the folder because I knew the dog would bite the nearest thing I put to it. So I let it bite that and not my fingers. And eventually she kind of fell to the floor. But at no time had she told me in the conversations that the dog leapt at people in the street. She just said he can growl at people in the street in her phone call. She never pointed that. I subsequently found out he'd bitten about 10 people on the King's Road. Now, those who know the King's Road in London, this is a very, very crowded street about a mile long, which is full of shops and people. And she walked it along there every day because she lived in a flat there, which was miraculous. And he had bitten several people. There was no dangerous dogs act. And well, there was the Dogs Act, which you could have done a summons from the Dogs Act. It's not like it is now. Now we're in kind of hysterical land and dog law. So I thought I didn't make the decision just on that. I had a long chat with her. I tried to handle the dog, but when I took the lead off her, it shot up the lead to try and bite my arm. So I had to hang it away from me so it couldn't get to my body. Then we had to work out some system where she would get it back. I'd asked her to put a muzzle on it. She said she couldn't get a muzzle on it. And she couldn't. There was just a battle on the ground with the muzzle. And I love it when I read in books and it says, give the dog a tidbit and he'll get used to the muzzle. Well, not really. Not in established behavior. And so she couldn't get a muzzle on it. And I said to her, you're walking up a public street every day. This dog is going to seriously injure somebody. And she was a nice lady. She was nice. She just lost control of this dog. And the dog had got more confident leaping at people. Because obviously the dog sees it leaps. The people are repelled. So it sees itself winning the space and it gets more and more confident doing it. That's not good in a crowded street like Oxford Street or King's Road. So I was in Bruce Vogel's one day and he said, there's a man just appeared. He's an animal behaviorist. And I said, God, what's an animal behaviorist? He said, is he a dog behaviorist? He said, he sees all animals. And it clicked in my mind because I've been studying animal species since I was a child. Well, there's millions of animal species. So how does where does the dog bit come in anyway? That was skipped over. And I was more fascinated and curious. So Roger had got himself ensconced with a vet on the King's Road. And I suggested to this woman that this dog should be put down. And in my entire career, I think I've done that maybe 5 or 6 times out of the tens of thousands of dogs I've either seen or advised on. Because to me, there was no training environment we could practice in. We're in the middle of a city, and I you couldn't retrain this dog on public paths leaping at people, and the woman couldn't hold it. So I spoke to Roger on the phone, and I said, "Oh, I'd like to meet you," and I think he had a very low opinion of dog trainers, which is strange because he's got a very high opinion now, a very high opinion. Because, like most academics who come into our profession, I think he was the first, by the way, he's learned that to solve dog behavior, generally, you have to have a very high level of knowledge of dog training because you have to manage the dogs. And that's through discipline and training. So had this woman, for example, had a well-trained dog, and it leapt at me, she could have got it to sit and stay if it had been trained properly. She'd had some control, but she had control now of the behavior or of the training. So Roger said there was no problem, he could solve it. And so I was quite excited because I thought, wow, I can normally deal with most dogs, but this man's got some magic. Anyway, long story short, it didn't solve the problem, and the dog was eventually euthanized. I think he gave it some drugs at the time, which again was new to me. I'd never heard of giving dogs psychotropic drugs to dogs. I'd never heard of drugs for dogs. I think the most we ever had was Valium for bonfire night. But now, of course, vets are pushing drugs because it's money, and it's only money. It's certainly not the best interests of the dogs, because drugs do not solve dog problems in behavior. They may mask them, they may dumb the dog down. I've seen plenty of that. But, if you take a human and you dumb them down so their brain's not sparking, it's not sharp, it's dull, they're not as reactive as the when they've got a clear mind. That's not a solution. And at the time, Bruce agreed with me, and he refused to give dogs pharmacology. Well, he refused to deal with pharmacology with dog behavior. And so I met Roger, and then I didn't, there was a 5-year gap before I actually met him at Crufts in Earl's Court at the time, selling his doggy toothpaste. Well, that was the next time I met him. And over time, with a few bumps, we become quite good friends. And the one thing I will say about him, because he comes from farming stuff, is that he's very passionate about animals. And I think what I've demonstrated to him on many occasions, he knows now, is that dog training is like education for a child. You cannot have a dog in the modern world without a very good standard of dog training.
Which he does now with his training centre, doesn't he? There's lots of dog training classes.
Yes, he has a training centre. He doesn't do much training.
No.
He quite confesses to me that he's not a dog trainer. And he's been controversial over the years. When I hear him on the radio or TV, I remember when he had to go at Cocker Spaniel breeders because they had a lot of idiopathic aggression in them. And he was very good at getting noticed and being controversial. Some of the points he was making were true, but it's the way he delivered them. Now, I'm not necessarily overtly bothered about people's feeling when truth is in the matter, but he had a very good style of winding and I think he used to enjoy winding the breeders up. He used to go on radio and just wind them up. He thought it was great fun. And he became well known.
Yeah. And how did the Canine Feline Behaviour Association, how did that fit into this kind of changing world of behaviourists and trainers and that kind of division and things like that?
I think it was John Fisher, John Rogerson, and the chap that went to, I can't remember his name, he went to Norway, married a Norwegian woman. I think he was an ex-guide dog trainer. And Neville, who was Roger's, like Peter Neville, who's called himself lots of titles. He had a degree in biology, which miraculously trained to a behaviour degree. I don't know how he did that. I'll leave other people to discern.
I was waiting for the phrase "toy salesman" to come
Yeah,
out.
me too. I was
Well,
bracing for
yeah,
it.
well, your anticipatory skills are marvelous because I'm just about to say, Roger said to Roger when he was setting up the APBC, I said to Roger, "Oh, it's being set up by these four people." And I said, "Peter Neville." He goes, "He was my toy salesman," and he said it with great glee. I said, "Well, he's probably going to sell all the toys for the behaviour solutions within the group." And of course, I have some communication with them, but not a lot. I wasn't really interested in joining organisations because I had my bubble in London. I do believe on reflection that I become quite successful and the best known behaviourist and dog trainer in London over many decades. And I didn't really care what people thought about me outside my training area. So me being a member of a national organization, I couldn't see the benefit to me because I was doing very well, very happy, lovely clients, lots of vets recommending me. I didn't need to expand into and I always had a view from dog training clubs when I was a boy that they were always bickering and arguing. That hasn't changed. They still bicker and they still argue. So I chose not to join that. And the CFBA came about because the PET plan, which everybody's familiar with now. So PET plan was started by Patsy Bloom. She was one of my clients in London, in the West End. She lived in Regent's Park in the Adam houses, those big white beautiful houses. And I also dealt with her sister for many years, for over a decade and a half, training her retrievers, which I used in some of my TV work. And she got a vet's bill. I don't know, I think it was off Bruce, but she got a very expensive one. Obviously, he had very good skills and he charged accordingly. And she'd come up with the idea. I don't know what her background was, but she started Pet Plan. And we chat about it. And it was very successful. Subsequently, a decade or so later, it was sold for a good profit. So that was the first pet insurance. And in that pet insurance, there was a small amount of it you could use for remedial behavior. Now, there were no other pet behavior insurances, and I don't think there was for another 10, possibly 15 years. I'm going off memory, so would be out on that. So Pet Plan was the only pet insurance that I recall at that time. And I chatted to a sister more about it, and I thought there's good and bad in this. Good for the obvious reasons, and bad that once insurance gets involved, vets bills start to spiral, and we all know what they're like at the moment. So I was dealing with a client in Berkhamsted, which is the nearest town to Applewood, my Applewood Behaviour Centre near Ashridge Forest. And I dealt with lots of vets in my local area, and I was going out to see a woman, and she had Pet Plan. I'd never used clients' pet insurance. I just carried on charging my fees. So this woman was highly recommended to me because the problem she had, the specific aggression problem she'd had, she'd seen a number of dog trainers. And even at that time, not many of them were calling themselves behaviorists. That was very uncommon, unlike what Ross mentioned before, where now it's very common. I doubt if 1 in 100 used that term. So the woman said to me, she said, I'd love to see you, but I've spoken to Pet Plan and only the APVC is unless you're a member of the APPC, you can't use the insurance. So the person they recommended from the APPC was a woman who joined the APPC quite recently, who had no qualifications in dogs or dog behavior. She had I can't remember what the qualification, I'm not even sure it was animal behavior because they were still quite uncommon then. It could have been biology or zoology or something. And she literally had little or no experience, except she was a member of this organization. And at that time, they were trying to recruit. So, in essence, in my view, if you said you were a mind reader or you could juggle, you could get into the APBC because they wanted numbers. So my client told me this, and I contacted Pet Plan because I'd known Patsy Bloom, who set it up. And they said to me, you will need to join the APBC because we're not recognizing individuals, we're only recognizing organizations, and that was the only organization. I said, well, that's not strictly true because you also recognize Dr. Roger Mugford, and he's not an organization. He said, yeah, he's the exception. I said, well, can we have two exceptions? And he said, no. So I wrote them a letter. I'm not going to tell you what was in it, but I was friends with the head of the Times newspaper, and I think it was the Independent too. And I said, at that time, I had about 15 years experience. I've trained hundreds, thousands of dogs and doing behavior and dog training. And I was home office trained, qualified. I qualified on a number of other courses with quite well-known trainers, and I had a home office qualification in the police. And this lady had a piece of paper saying she was a zoologist, which had absolutely no relationship whatsoever to do with dog training, dog behavior, dogs per se. So I was quite annoyed that they were that inflexible. Anyway, I sent this letter to the head of Pet Plan, and I got a visit of a man, a very nice man, and he come to my centre. I explained all what I've just explained to you, but with a lot more detail. I said, you expect my client to go with a substandard person who doesn't have any qualifications in dogs, none. She's going to be charged at that time, whatever it was, £200 or £300 to see them, when I'm going to go out with them, put on a dog training course first, and then deal with the behavior in conjunction with the dog training and lay down a plan from my knowledge and experience. And you're forcing her, I said, to use somebody who, without equivocation, is not only inferior, inexperienced, and not up to the job, just because she's a member of this organization. So I said, that's not going to happen. I said, this is not going to go down well in the press. And I was prepared to make a publicity campaign. They obviously saw that this wasn't going to look good. And at the time, I was doing a little bit of TV, so I had some influence. So he said to me, why don't you set up your own organization? Because we don't want one. I mean, they hadn't been going very long, probably a year or two. And I said, I don't want to start an organization. I'm not interested in organizations. He said, well, it will allow, how you term, very highly skilled people to join something without academic trappings, because that's all it was. These academic qualifications were not qualifications in dogs. It was just people who studied theory on non-associated subjects. It was elitism at its worst. So I started the Canine Feline Behaviour Association, and that was long before I met Ross. And as he said, the rest is history. So it wasn't because I wanted to start it. And the Guild of Dog Trainers was similar story. But maybe not go into that today. It was a similar story. Ross was about when we started that. In fact, Ross could do his own podcast and state how it worked. So, yes, the politics of dogs and so on and so forth, but that's how the CFBA started. But I set down very high standards, and the most important standard was to me is, have you trained several hundred dogs and clients, not just dogs, in behavior stroke training? Have you got the knowledge and experience? Are you a person who's motivated by helping people with dogs? And even to this day, I get applications for the CFBA in from zoologists, from animal behaviorists. And when I ask them simple questions, and this is 25, because the CFBA has been going for about 27 years or more. When I get replies off these animal behaviorists saying that they never actually met a dog, they never trained a dog, they've never dealt with the behavior, but they have a degree in animal behavior or a doctorate in animal behavior. And I say to them, when I did converse with them, I don't now, it's all done by email now. So what makes you think somebody wants to pay you £300 or £400 to get your advice when you've got a academic theory on these subjects? And he said, well, they nearly all said, well, we're getting practice, we're getting experience. I said, well, I can't go to people and tell them I'm going to solve all their veterinary problems and practice as I go along veterinary science. And the people will pay me while I'm learning this because I've read lots of books on veterinary science. It doesn't work that way. Mm-hmm. So to me, unless you're field trained in the real world, you shouldn't be allowed near dogs, and definitely you shouldn't be allowed near people, because you're just spouting theory. And theory, as Les knows from a conversation we had a long time ago, theory and practice. What was it, Les?
Oh, God.
In theory, there is no practice.
In theory, there's no difference between theory and practice, but in practice, there is.
Lovely. Look at that memory she's got.
God, when did I write that? Like nearly 20 years ago?
We discussed that. Was that about 20 years ago?
We did the roles in 2008. 2009 we did the roles.
Yeah.
But that's 17 years ago.
Yeah.
19 years ago.
And that is a true saying. You know, and it applies not to dogs or dog behavior. It applies to most subjects of a similar ilk. You know, I'm sure stonemason would love to be competing against a theoretical stonemason who could name every stone and type of stone in the world. And the stonemason probably couldn't, but one can do the job and one can't.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's and of course young people going on courses now, because courses are obviously all the rage. Courses are just a support structure for playing around with ideas and giving you a basic structure of theory, or as in our case with the Cambridge Institute, practice, not just theory. But that's all they are. I've said this on many of the courses I've taught on. The most critical factor I've always believed in dog behavior and training is true. And I say, you give me a person with modest knowledge of behavior and training, dog training, sufficient but modest, but they're brilliant communicators with people, and they will always outperform the person who's brilliant with dogs and brilliant with behavior, but is awful with people.
Yeah.
Because people are the conduit of your knowledge. And if they take a dislike to you, and I've seen it on many occasions, they stop listening. And it doesn't matter what knowledge you've got, you can't impart it if the person's not listening. And we've all experienced this, where you get people who come onto courses, or you're teaching them, or even in just a simple dog training class, they're really curt and sharp, they have no sense of humor, and people are not interested in them. They're either being bored to death or they're being patronized in a condescending way. And then people stop listening. But you go to the trainers. I mean, Charlie Claricott is a good example.
Yeah.
Over in Cambridgeshire. Charlie's got no academic qualifications in dog behavioural training that I'm aware of. He's not pretentious. But as soon as he gets in front of his crowd, and he's got 4 or 5 dog training rings, first of all his dogs are well trained, so he leads by example. That's getting less and less common.
Mm-hmm.
And he inspires the people. You can see him walk in as a personality. They want to copy him. They can't wait to have a dog that's like his. Half the battle's done.
And they are
By
a
the
little bit
person.
scared.
Pardon?
They're
They are a little bit scared.
Oh, Charlie's
Oh, yes.
lovely.
Yeah, well, if you remember me in the training classes, I mean, in the lectures, a lot of people were a bit frightened of me, but I tended to diffuse that very quickly. But I mean, I used to really take care with the shy people because I knew that shy people and dogs and people do not go. And a lot of the people who are not successful are the shy people.
Mm-hmm.
I've got a final question for you, Colin. I don't know if Les has got any others, but my final question is in 2 parts. What do you think of the state of where we're at now with both with dogs and the industry? And the second part of that question is, what do you see coming in the future for where we're at based on your past experiences?
Well, when we have the Pet Education Behaviour Council, which I and some other people founded, which the idea was to bring different organisations in dog training, dog behaviour, the dog care world under one umbrella. So we have a not an individual organisation, but a overview.
Mm-hmm.
So this council doesn't train people, but all the people like the Guild of Dog Trainers and the CFBA can join it to a higher level of rules. So we can come together and discuss the solutions of the future and bring some harmony in. And that came about, as you know, because of the Cork meetings with Sir Colin Spedding. And when I launched it at the end of the meetings, he was delighted. He said, "That's what we've been having the meetings for." I don't know how long ago was that. Was that, Les? Was that about 10 years ago?
10, close to 20. That
Yeah.
was 2009 again. 2008,
And then,
2009.
as you all know in the dog world, what I term as the dark side of our business, they were at the meeting, the APBC and some others, and they just had a panic. They all had a mass heart attack at the other end of the table because I launched the Pet BC 2 days before the last meeting, and Colin Spedding congratulated me and David Cavill, and he said, "That's exactly what we need. You can now all join the Pet BC as organisations," and they were his words. So we look forward to the other organisations joining the Pet BC, and they would have an equal stake on the board, so it would be fair to everybody. But they didn't. The first thing they did was twiddle in the corner, have resuscitation because of Sir Colin Spedding's announcement that the Cork meetings were ended. Colin and David had solved the problem. And they never contacted us at all. I mean, they could have contacted me the next day and said, "Why don't we have a meeting now, how we can bring the dog world together?" Which is what we did. No, they did what happens so often in the dog world. "We hate you. You thought of the idea first, but we'll copy you." And sure enough, 14 months later, they copied Mirror. I think it was David Montgomery was the first chairman of is it the ATBC?
AB2C. The AB2C.
Yeah. Now, this is a man who's shown toy breeds all his life. And as I understand it, his doctorate in animal behavior was sea life, jellyfish. He's never been a trainer. He's never done a training course. And he decided that he had the knowledge to set up an organization in opposition to the Pet Education Training and Behavior Council. This was typical of the dark side, is that instead of coming together, they set up their own opposite organization, which, to be fair, they've been very successful with. But they copied our website, they copied basically our philosophy, and this man who led them was wholly unsuitable, unqualified to do that. So all the people in Britain who are doing courses, remember, when you're looking at these organizations, you need to examine who these people are and not just go onto the site and say the chairman or the president is this man and assume that he's knowledgeable and that knowledge is what formed the organization. He was a show dog trainer showing toy breeds at Crufts, and that was his only experience. Whereas in the Pet BC, everybody who came into our committee to run it were all highly skilled in dogs. And dog courses and dog training and dog behavior. I'm sure that they've altered that by now. I'm probably erasing the past so you can't find it. But that's the state. That's what we try to do. Now, going on to Ross's second question is, how do I see the future? I'm not optimistic for the future because the academics have taken over the asylum. The academics, nothing much good came out of academia to benefit dog owners and pet dog owners. Most of the people I've met coming in with academic degrees, especially in strange subjects like zoology and animal behavior, the one thing they're all skilled at is accumulating power because they've been well educated, and they use that education to corner power, which I believe was what the veterinary college is now trying to do. It's trying to take control of the names, which I and a few other people formulated, like canine behaviorist and so on, as if they will control who can use these terms. Well, the veterinary profession has got nothing to do with dog behavior or dog training, and it should just carry on with its veterinary science, which it's quite good at. But it shouldn't be interfering in other areas. And to me, this is a power grab. If the academics do take over the asylum, and all the skilled people like Charlie Claricotts and us, who learnt our craft from experience, from thousands of hours of work with dogs and clients, are sidelined, then they will be making the decisions who can join an organization, who can run an organization. And it'll always be with, we have the best interests of the pet dog owning public. That's why we're doing it. It's not. They have their own interest, and it's to do with power. And to be frank with you, if all of them who are pushing this, their hierarchy, the academics that is, if they had to go out into a public park with a badly trained dog and try and demonstrate how they could train it in that environment, I'm pretty confident that they would all fail. And that's the people who want to lead the dog world. Whilst I have a breath in my body, that's not going to happen. I will fight them at every level of the way on behalf of dog behaviorists, highly skilled people, people who are motivated, not for money, but who love dogs and who want the best training methods for them. And if I have to, I'm more than happy to spend large sums of money in the High Court. And I will block anybody, whether it's the veterinary college or these other organizations, who try to wrest control of the dog training world for their own selfish power grab.
Perfect summation of where we're at, I think. And I guess if people want to find out more about you, Colin, we'll put the links to the Pet BC and everything in the show notes below the podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm not up front line now, as you know, of dogs. I work behind the scenes for a number of organizations. And new people, when I came along, I was a new person. Now new people will come along and take over. And I mean, in essence, there is a kind of one final plus. This is my belief. Whoever in the Department of the Environment or DEFRA or the Royal Veterinary College or any other organisation believe that they can make rules to control what the public has access to, well, they're wrong. And they're wrong on this basis. The public, by natural, human selection, evolution, will always gravitate to the person, help them with their dog, who they find through recommendation, who has been successful and has an excellent track record as a good, kind dog trainer or behaviorist. And you cannot stop a member of the public going to see whoever they want. And words, or guarding words, is semantics. You can call yourself what you want. You can call yourself the dog mastermind or the dog enigma. And as long as people know that means a dog behaviorist, they can go to you. And you can't stop people doing that. You can't pass laws to stop them. I will spend my money on the person to help me with whatever I want by my volition, not by the volition of a hierarchy of elitists. And that's my positive end note.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your time today, Colin. A fascinating little journey.
Well, I should think you'll get some comments.
Or possibly one
and
or
I'm
two.
setting up a website like Mick did. It says, if you've got any complaints, go to fuckoff.com. Do you remember when he
Martin? Yeah.
Do you remember when he wrote that on his TV website?
Yes.
And I thought that was not the sort of thing I would do. I thought it was quite amusing when he wrote it.
Yeah, well, he's not
Indeed.
changed.
Oh, Colin, thank you. It was so great talking to you today. Thank you.
Okay, Les.
Thanks for listening. It's not just gun dogs and not just guard dogs, but all things canine, as we hope you have discovered. Please like, share and subscribe and help us spread a bit of common sense back into dog ownership. And a review wouldn't go amiss either. Catch up with Les and Ross again in about 14 days for more canine conversations. Until next time, stay well and enjoy your dogs. Any dog related questions or topics, just drop an email to talk@cfba.uk or message us via facebook.com/gundogs and guard dogs podcast.